What's happening, guys? So one of the things that I don't talk a lot about is that I am gluten-free. And the reason I don't talk a lot about it is because there's kind of like this stigma around it that gluten-free is healthier and that it helps you lose weight and it's this like kind of magic approach. I don't ever want to give that impression. So I don't think that me not talking about it is beneficial. In fact, if anything, if I really think about it, it's more beneficial that I do talk about it so that I can kind of help get rid of some of that stigma. But I do want to talk about how, you know, going gluten-free can actually really help you clean up your diet and make it easier to lose weight. I'm not suggesting that you should go gluten-free if you don't have a gluten intolerance, which for the record, that's why I'm gluten-free. The reason I did it gluten-free is because I was having all kinds of digestion problems and it got to the point where I was just miserable and sick and felt like crap and run down all the time. And finally, after a lot of different processes, I finally found out that I do have a gluten intolerance. So that's why I ended up going gluten-free. But what I have found is it has made it so it's basically forced me to clean up my diet better, which is why I think a lot of people do see improvements and see good fat loss when they go gluten-free, because it almost forces you to clean up your diet, especially with regards to carb sources, because there aren't a ton of carb sources that are gluten-free. Right? A lot of carb sources have gluten in it, and you have to kind of be careful. So if a lot of the quote-unquote dirty foods that are some of my favorite foods that I can no longer eat, they're all gluten. So things like, you know, pizza and donuts and cookies and cake. Can you tell I'm a sweets person? And even like hamburger buns with my hamburgers and things like that. Like all that stuff is now taken away. Now, yes, there's gluten-free options. We all know it's not quite the same. But by going gluten-free, it almost forces you to eat cleaner. So I think that's why a lot of times we see good improvements in going gluten-free. But I don't necessarily think it's a good idea to do it if you don't have an actual intolerance. I think it's better to create a better relationship with food and practice flexible dieting and all that type of stuff. But I wanted to kind of explain how going gluten-free can help clean things up and can help a lot of people see better results. The only question is, can you maintain it? Can you keep doing it? Because if you're gluten-free, if you go gluten-free, even though you don't have to go gluten-free and you're doing it just to try to lose weight, what's going to probably happen is what happens to most people is they do it, they lose weight, they can no longer take it anymore, they start feeling super restricted, and what ends up happening is they start binging on all those foods that they said they couldn't eat anymore. So now all those donuts and cookies and all that wonderful stuff comes back with a vengeance, and the weight comes back on really quick. You suppress your metabolism from dieting, then you overeat, rapid weight gain happens, and you just put yourself in a worse position than you had even started with. So anyway, yes, it does help clean up the diet. And while I am a big proponent of flexible dieting and I'm all about just hitting your macros and being flexible, I'm not saying that food quality doesn't matter. It does. I do find that you do better, you feel better, you perform better if you have a diet that's mostly surrounded with nutrient-dense whole foods. I think it's important. It's also important to make sure that we don't totally deprive ourselves to the point where we end up binging. So there's always a balance in there. So this is where we need to be more flexible. This is why I'm a big believer in flexible dieting and not taking any foods and making them off limits unless they have to be. If you have an allergy to something or an intolerance, you probably want to stay away from it. That's where I'm at. I have a gluten intolerance and I feel like garbage if I eat gluten, so I am forced to stay away from it. It helps me clean up my diet. In some ways it sucks, in other ways it's a good thing. I just have to look at the big picture and say it's worth not eating those foods for me because I'm going to feel better. If that is not you, you do not need to avoid them. So anyway, I hope that helped. Any questions, please let me know, and I will talk to you next time.
I'm addicted to the love that you're giving. Every minute, every day I've been craving.